Okay, we're here today to get the information on the Tomlinson Run Church of Christ and how it got started here at this place. I'll read this information that I got from a sister in the Weirton Heights Church years ago. When the singing of faith of our fathers, we immediately think of such as Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Peter, Paul, and James. We think about the Christian martyrs who suffered so cruelly under the reigns of tyrant leaders. Independent thinkers began to restoration movements throughout the European history. Our persons who bravely crossed the Atlantic Ocean to settle in a land promising religious freedom. Maybe the song brings back to mind the trials that faced the men like Alexander Campbell, J.D. Tent, and others who traveled around the United States in an effort to restore the New Testament Christianity. Perhaps we sing of the songs, we might also remember the faith that lived in some of the folks only a half a century ago, which led to the Congregation of the Lord being established in Weirton. Shortly after World War I, a younger couple by the name of Ben and Laura Way from Ben's Run, West Virginia, came to Weirton to search for employment. They secured jobs here and settled in a house on Cove Road. Ben and Laura were both Christians, and their desire to keep the Lord's Supper led them to attend the service of a Christian church here. Only after one visit, Ben decided they could not continue to worship where the mechanical instrument music was used along with the singing. The Ways had a relative in the church at Ness, Ohio, a small town about 50 miles southwest of Weirton. So for a time, they traveled by streetcar and taxi to attend the services there. The long trip necessity for staying overnight eventually led to Ben and Laura to seek a way to meeting for worship at a little closer at home. Meanwhile, there was another Christian who lived in Weirton by the name of Ethel Dennis. Ethel's husband, Jim, had to come to Weirton from the St. Mary's area seeking employment in 1912. And shortly thereafter, they were married and settled on the road on Cove Road. One of Ethel's children, Olive Stephen, is a member of the congregation today. Remembers how their family rode a streetcar to Steubenville to attend the worship services of the church, which met in the old Rex Theater building in the Oddfellows Hall. Then, Mrs. Dennis was acquainted with the Ways and suggested they'd meet together and worship God. So living in Weirton in the early 1920s on Marlin Heights Road was a couple named William and Stella Ash. These people are deceased, and there isn't much information about them at this writing except that they were very dedicated Christians. However, the Way, Ash, and Dennis families began meeting together in each other's homes in 1923. Still another Weirton family, Ralph and Teresa Peavy, who come to Weirton to find work in the mill around 1921, also lived in a house on the Way at the top of Hazlet Avenue and began meeting with the church there. Their daughter, Gertrude Sweeney, who still is a member of the West Street Church today, lived on the Washington Street with her husband, William, and 3 children, and remembers the meeting from house to house in those early years, and the younger brother, Jim, also attended there. The church met on Sunday evenings, and services was always conducted in a very formal manner. When it was the Dennis's turn to host the services, the family moved back and moved the living room furniture and set up benches, which had made by Ethel's husband, especially for this purpose. Although Jim never obeyed the gospel himself, he eagerly lent a hand whenever there was a need and was a significant factor in helping the church become established here. There was not much socializing between other members that the fellowship they enjoyed at these services, because everyone's time was taken up in hard work and keeping their families together. Between the years of 1923 and 1927, the church grew enough to rent the upstairs of the old city building located on Cove Road in approximate area of today's new city building. Later, they met in the old Oddfellows Hall on Main Street. The first gospel meeting in Weirton was held by Tom Curtin in a tent set up on Hudson Avenue in 1924. By 1927, the membership had decided they needed a meeting house of their own, so they purchased the land on Orr Street and erected a building with the labor donated by the men, which was dedicated, and it was dedicated to Holiday's Church of Christ. It was a small building and had a coal furnace in the basement and required some of the men coming early in cold weather to build the fire. It would be nice and warm, so it's time for the members to assemble for the services. And of course, there was a powder room just outside the building in a small yard. There was no baptistry, so the people who wished to obey the gospel were usually baptized in Harmon Creek at the location area residents called the Three Arches, because there was an archway for the railroad bridge there. Some of the first men who served the church in Weirton were Ralph Peavy and from Buckhannon. They were elders. The deacons was William Ash and Ben Way. There are too many names to list all the Orr Street members, but a few of the family members are still members of our congregation today. Are Kleins, Dennises, Stevens, and Wetzels, and Rice. Opal Wetzel recalls that when she and John first came to live here in 1930, they had heard that there was a small church somewhere, and so every Sunday they set out to walk all over town, determining to find its meeting place. It was only after the first child had died of a serious illness that they had taken the baby back to Middleburn, West Virginia, to be buried, and they met a preacher who knew a member at the Weirton Church. He contacted Manny Way, and they got in touch with John and Opal and took him to services with them. By 1941, the church had grown to 150 members and needed a larger building to accommodate them. They purchased a lot on 3530 West Street and began construction of the building, which was not completed and dedicated until September the 3rd, 1950. In the meantime, the church met in the basement of the West Street, and along with their own growing help, congregation got started in Pewtown, West Virginia, Tomlinson Run Church, and they started a congregation in Toronto, Ohio, and in Langlois, Pennsylvania. Many of the serving elders at West Street began 1950 to 1958 was Ermal Amos, Dale Beagle, and Roland Wright. Deacons were Alvin Barnhart, Victor Roden, and Warren Williams. Some of the men who served the first preachers at the Weirton were C.D. Beagle, H.J. Hawley, H.W. Bankus, the grandfather of Russell Bankus, Jr., who is a minister for the West Street Church today. Joe Taylor, Horst Taylor, Elmer Taylor, Wellman Gangenzer, Robert Cooper, Charlie Wells, Harold Hadley, George Hanlon, L.W. Bays, Fred Dennis, and Denver Cooper. Again, the church membership increased to a number of 325 active members. And it was decided to establish the second congregation on Weirton Heights. A building was erected at Marie and Guy Streets and dedicated to the Weirton Heights Church of Christ in March of 1958. The congregation began with 75 members. Preachers who had served the Weirton Heights Church before was Brother Kenny, Paul Case Bolt, William Daines, and Denver Cooper. Elders served the church at Guy and Marie Street was Roland B. Wright, Warren Shepard, Bob Wright, and Leon Myers. Deacons were Henry Williams, Harley Wetzel, and Bob Kenny. Soon the membership growing, and plans were made to erect a new building in the present location. This building is completed at the cost of $250,000. It was dedicated in the fall of 1969. So we came to be what we are today. We might like to speculate about the things would have turned out if the faith of the early Christians who established and supported the congregation of the Lord's people in Weirton during the past 50 years had not been so strong. We might wonder what would have happened if those who fell away through the years and had been stronger with more supportive. At any rate, it has done what is done, and the only relevant question is, let what we do today. That's the information there. Okay, that brings us down to the church being established here, which the West Street congregation did. And